Hello and welcome to 5-Minute Math. Today we are looking at the 8th grade concept of using the Pythagorean Theorem. This is standard 8.7c in the great state of Texas, and we are using item number 15 off the 2016 released STAAR test. If you have not done so already, please go ahead and take a moment to pause the video, work this problem out on your own, unpause it, and then we will look at our answers together. So we've got a set designer for a play. We've got some background scenery, a large piece of plywood, and then used a 13-foot long pole to hold a piece of plywood upright right there using this diagram. So we need to find h, the total height of the piece of plywood. And here's something we're going to have to keep in mind. There's 2 feet of the plywood that's not necessarily being used. So we're looking at this little chunk right here. But it doesn't include the 2 feet up at the very top. So that's kind of confusing here. So what we should see is we should see a right triangle. And we should be thinking a squared plus b squared equals c squared. That's the Pythagorean theorem. And what that is if you take this 5 foot and you make it a square, we'll call that b. You take this, however many feet this is, don't know, right, and pretend that's a square. That's a. What that's going to equal is those 2 areas actually equal the area of our hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always c. So this a square plus b square always equals the c square. That's the cool thing about any right triangle. So that's what a squared plus b squared equals c squared means. So let's plug that in here. So let's just call this a squared. Since h is the whole length, I don't want to call it h. So let's just say a squared plus b is going to be 5 squared equals c squared, which is 13. All right, so let's simplify that a little bit. So a squared plus 5 squared is not 5 times 2, it's 5 times itself. That's 25. And then 13 squared, it's not 13 times 2, it's 13 times itself. It's 169. So once it looks like that, it's pretty simple. Let's go ahead and subtract 25 from both sides. So we're going to have that variable by itself. So a squared equals 144. Now, this is where we sometimes get stuck, because the variable is not 100% isolated yet. It's still got this exponent we need to get rid of. And so we're always doing inverse operations, right? So we always subtract when we need to take away an addition. We always divide when we need to take a multiplication. What is the inverse operation of when something is squared? Well, we take a root. In this case, we're going to take the square root. So when we take the square root, right, what that's going to do is that's just going to get you the side. Not the h, but just the side right there, a. And so the square root cancels out the square, and so that's going to just leave you with a. Sometimes this can get into an irrational number, but in this case, it looks like it's a perfect square, 144, so it's going to equal 12. So if you wanted to plug it back in, right, you could figure that out, but 12 squared plus 5 squared equals 13 squared. But that's not my answer. My answer is h. And remember, I got to add this 12 up with that 2. So my answer is going to be 14. So that's the tricky part. We could do all that work and get it wrong if we just put in 12. Then we got to bubble it in. So here's our answer document. We're going to have 2 digits to the right. Leave them both blank. We don't need them. You don't need to put in zeros. Those are assumed to be zeros unless you fill them in with something. Though it won't be incorrect. It's just unnecessary. So we need to put in not our 12, but our 14. Remember, because we had the 12 right here, plus the 2 feet up at the top. You have a plus and minus off to the left. You don't need either of those either, so just bubble in the 1 and the 4 underneath, and you are good.